All right, so let's go move on to another part of the lecture for Chapter 1. I'm going to go through this. It's basically a narrated PowerPoint slideshow relatively fast, knowing that you can stop and go back to any section that you want as you have need. So first, talking about intercultural communication, this idea of interaction in a multicultural world. This basically stresses the fact that intercultural communication is everywhere. In terms of the big G word, the globalization word, it's in its third decade, and essentially what that means is that very, very few people can live a life without encountering intercultural communication in some form or another. In terms of the global community, this simply refers to the fact that intercultural communication is everywhere. It's not new, but now it's necessary, even unavoidable. With our world planet's population nearing about 9 billion, we are living essentially in each other's laps. Many doubt our planet's capacity to sustain 9 billion people. It's important that we learn to interact well together. In terms of growing domestic diversity, this refers to U.S. population changes. Later on in this learning unit, I'll show you some demographic charts relevant to our own country and to our own state, and we'll even take a look at Menifee. In terms of U.S. immigration, the textbook underscores our tendency to view this migration of demographics negatively. We tend to blame the immigrant. Think about the last few years of California's fiscal woes. Did you ever hear about our financial woes as being blamed on the illegal immigrant? I know that I did. There is a societal tendency to blame the immigrant. On page 5 and 6 of the textbook, some of the greatest contributions of the immigrant are cited. Promote that so you can help balance the negative view that many folks in society have. And lastly, this notion of technology, and what does that have to do with culture? Technology has certainly connected us, and some argue that we are hyper-connected. Our world can seem very smaller because of technology. And yet at the same time, media technology is separating us. It can bring more polarization. Americans can segregate themselves into communities, both face-to-face or online, that are homogeneous. In other words, homogeneous. They are the same. Additionally, with the anonymity provided with the internet, civility has gone out the window. People are not even civil to each other. Think of how extreme or rude or cruel online evaluations can be. I mean, just skim some of the comments under a YouTube video. Really? People are going to talk that way to each other? Add race and culture into the mix and you can just imagine. Truly, technology can both bring us together and divide us. Now I want to hit on a few terms in the chapter. Intercultural communication. Intercultural communication involves the interaction between people whose cultural perceptions and symbol systems differ enough to influence the communication event. That's the definition that's in the textbook. The critical part of the definition is to influence. Dominant culture. The dominant culture in this country has long been the white male. It's approximately 40% of the population. This group continues to hold positions of power or influence, but there are signs that indicate that this will likely change over the next decades. It's expected that the white male will be the minority by 2020. Co-cultures refers to specialized groups, smaller groups. These used to be referred to as subcultures. Examples include gender. These can be role-based groups, religion, if you're a surfer. Society is another term, and we'll let the book define that. Now I want to spend more time discussing this notion of culture shock. If you've gone through it, you know it's very uncomfortable. We tend to prefer the familiar, sort of like the comfort of an old pair of jeans. Or think about the feeling when you've been away from home for a long time and you walk in the front door and it's just this overwhelming feeling of, I'm home. I mean, we like the familiar. Our past expectations, our norms, we know how things work. When people move to a new culture, they take the belief, customs, and behaviors and values of their old culture with them. And depending on the similarity of the old and the new, one might experience a clash, resulting in disorientation, conflict, stress, anxiety, a lot of misunderstandings. Calvera Oberg was the first to use this term culture shock. In terms of defining culture shock, it's the psychological and physical discomfort from being thrust into another culture. There are 4 stages of culture shock in this U curve. Oberg's model is still the basis for these understandings today. So we're going to talk about the 4 phases of culture shock. First, the exhilaration phase. Here, you've just arrived in the new cultural environment and you are excited. This stage is characterized by great interest in the new culture. You're filled with a sense of euphoria and elation. You are psyched to be here. It's a positive feeling overall. You react well to stress. Not too surprisingly, you take a lot of pictures in this phase. And overall, the phase has been called the honeymoon phase. I mean, it's fun. But the next phase is not so fun. Disenchantment is when confusion and frustration set in. Suddenly you realize that things aren't going the way you expect them to. You can't predict, and it's overwhelming. You feel out of control, stressed, anxious. Even depression and paranoia have been characteristic of this phase. You feel so very tired. Interestingly, a preoccupation with cleanliness has been cited to be a phenomenon common to this time. Why? Why do you think that is? It's because you feel about the only thing you can control is your own body or your hotel room. The third phase is adjustment, and now things start to look up. You've developed some problem-solving skills, some conflict resolution strategies, and that gives you a sense of competence. You've sort of begun to figure out how some things work. You're developing a new set of norms, and that allows you an appreciation of the new culture, it to grow. By this time, you've obtained a few intercultural relationships that help you feel less alone. The last phase in this model is effective functioning. And by this time, you've figured out a great deal of the ways of the new culture. You've adapted well. This phase is characterized by personal growth, a constructive response to stress, and even a bicultural identity. Lastly, I want to offer 4 suggestions to help overcome the worst of culture shock. First, learn about the language of the host culture. 2, guard against ethnocentrism. 3, learn about the host culture. And 4, work to maintain your own culture.